Welcome to the Open Treasury Podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where Treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. And now your host, Jack Large.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jack Large, CTMfile editor, and I have with me, as always, Craig Jeffery, managing partner at Strategic Treasurer, and today being the 15th of October, in the midst of Cybos actually, we're going to be reviewing three of the latest Treasury news and developments, which each of them in their own way is particularly important. If we look first at McKinsey's Global Payment Report for 2021, it's a recipe they've been using for the last 6 years of basically reviewing what's going on in the industry, the payment industry. And as always, it's got some really interesting definitions and questions. The first thing is that it's issued in 4 or 5 chapters, depending on which way you look at it. And each one of them in their own way was important. First, they looked at global payments, where they predict the payment sector is going to return to a healthy growth. But more importantly for me was that they were actually saying they were redefining what the payments industry is about. How did you find this, Craig? Because I think this was important.
Yeah, I thought it was quite interesting what they're looking at. It's something that I guess I would say their view is that it's a more comprehensive process as opposed to discrete elements, payments by itself. I think they refer to it as, an end-to-end money movement process and relating it to services and platforms. I think that is absolutely crucial to what's changing, and that's impacting receivables, payables, and payment professionals. So that broader approach is key. And I think, they bring up a lot of good points. And one of their quotes that at the end was players electing not to adapt their strategies, whether by choice, inaction, et cetera, are likely to endure below peer growth and risk being displaced on key customer experiences. I think that might even be understated by how much is changing. What did you think about that, Jack?
Thing in global payments was redefining what the industry is about. It's not about payments, it's about the whole commercial process. And I think that's absolutely right. And we're seeing fintechs picking up little pieces of it, and they're all being brought together in some form of ecosystem in many different ways. My conclusion was, though, that they are saying that unless you get stuck in and really invest, you need to get out of the business because everything else is a waste of time. And I think that's right as well. It's now, they call it the whole end-to-end money movement process, which is right. And the strange thing is that all of a sudden, all the elements of the money movement process, including the financing, everything, all of that is up for grabs. No longer is it automatic that the banks are going to get the business. So a most interesting chapter. Then they moved on to central bank, stable coins and cryptocurrencies. And they were particularly interested in the central bank digital currencies. What their conclusion was, and I think it's right, is that you need everybody, including corporates, need to review the likely consequence of what's emerging. Okay, a lot of it's not clear, but McKinsey say, and they stressed, it's not too early to prepare for such disruption. The problem is we don't know what's going to happen. It's just that they know it's going to be serious. How did you see this?
Well, that's like the bugle call. What does it mean if you don't understand where to go? Like you said, it's going to be serious, but we don't know what's going to happen. Jack, I'm not sure what to say on this. As I read that, I think it brought up a bunch of interesting points. in the comparison between central bank digital currencies versus, well, let's just say private digital currencies. I don't know where it's going from what's written.
The most interesting, probably the most interesting thing for me in this chapter was how they identified that the central banks are realizing that what cryptocurrency means, the digital cash means, it's programmable money. And programmable money means you can do contracts with the money inside the contract. But it also means things like you can stop people going to certain places to use their digital currency. So all of a sudden, we're starting to see cash meaning very different things. I think we're going to have a lot of consultancy and analysis over the next few years as to what this really means. But again, McKinsey got their finger on what was happening.
Yeah, two things on that, Jack. On the programmable money side, like as you mentioned, contracts can have money embedded in them, and that's really an ongoing extension of the end-to-end process. Now it's contracts with money, and I think there's probably a lot of room to explore this as time goes on. And that seems to hold a lot of value, connecting those two. The restricting payments, so somebody doesn't buy cigarettes or alcohol on an individual level, I think those tend to be easily defeated. But the implications on the corporate side seem really quite interesting.
Yep, there's going to be a lot more to come on this one. And then finally, they looked at merchant acquiring and how small businesses represent a huge opportunity for merchant acquiring. The first thing this showed to me was that this report is really written for attracting business from banks and analysis from banks, because they don't really, McKinsey believe that they know what's going on. We'll see, but they concluded by saying that to keep growing, merchant acquirers will need to expand beyond core services, payments, acceptance, to offer solutions for enabling e-commerce growth, which is part of their definition. What's interesting is that already players like Stripe are bigger than quite a few of the banks already. They are worth more than the banks. The disruptive players are already investing heavily in this area. Conclusion McKinsey came to was failure to move fast could come at a high cost in low growth, which is really what the thing's all about. Again, a very interesting report. Then we had a small item, which from Bank of America, which, well, it looked small, but the more you think about it, it's really quite significant. It's going to enable corporates. It's called a recipient selection service, where you can expand the range of places where a customer can tell you they'd like the money to be sent. So instead of just being bank accounts, it's all the small local payment systems and things like PayPal and check and other recipient devices. All can be made through this simple platform. I think it's going to make a real difference, and it's obviously going to be followed by other banks and service providers. Interesting, simple but interesting.
Jack, a quick comment on that. This solving, particularly the business to consumer side, is what I see this article about. We've looked and we've seen in some of our research on the strategic treasurer side, we've seen that right around 3/4 of companies are asking their banks to solve the business to consumer, the B2C issue. So this is well aligned with what people are asking for.
Absolutely. And the number of payment systems, little payment systems, inverted commas, that are appearing. I talked to a group of corporate treasurers and they were just saying, I don't know which one to follow. I mean, this one's only got 1 million users. That one's got 50 million users. Which one do I join? Well, this removes the recipient selection process from BofA, removes that quandary. One aspect of it. It doesn't remove the collecting payments from these services, but we'll see. And then finally, we had an item which you were particularly keen on, where EBA and SWIFT and the clearinghouse have done a trial on instant payments to make it all work cross-border. Can you explain how this is significant? Because I think it is.
I think you're right, Jack. And this was the most interesting to me for a couple of reasons. I'll get into it. So Graham's article, so three associations, groups, networks, if you will, said they completed this proof of concept to make cross-border payments as seamless as the fastest domestic payment options. That may sound boring or it may sound somewhat intriguing, but why I think this is so important, Jack, is that, this idea of, are payments faster? That's great. Payments can be faster. Do we have more information with payments so the process is more streamlined for both parties? Yes, that's also good. But this idea of better payments, there's an element of what makes payments better. It's faster. You have broader reach. It carries more information. And so this is a combination of a lot of, the power of networks, the clearinghouse, SWIFT, EBA, that it's a combination, a roll-up of networks sharing their network. So the power of a network is what you can do on it. How big is the network? And so this is a massive multiplier for these three organizations covering the vast majority of banks by assets across the globe. And this simplifies or should simplify these type of payments. So it's truly the definition of better payments because it's all these faster and more improved payment items coming together with a network of networks. This is going to be really significant, I think, for those strategic reasons.
And what was also interesting is that I noticed that Visa have changed their way of advertising as to what they do. They're now talking about the Visa network, not Visa payments, Visa network, and you join a network. So this all ties together, doesn't it? The interesting question for treasurers, though, is how do I use this? How do I use this? Is it to make payments or is it to collect payments? Where is it going to benefit the most?
Those are great questions. There's an aspect of when we think about payments in a silo, it might be the transfer of value. When we start think of it more broadly, it's also about the movement of information and communication. And as you think about it more broadly, there's other aspects that can come from that or flow from that. And so this is at least the movement of value and information in a way that gets that looks beyond just your own organization, looks to your banks, looks to your trading partners, and can streamline that. So I think this is something that as this moves forward, corporations will need to pay attention to, as well as particularly banks, because banks are going to be the primary ones that offer this through to their corporate clients.
A very interesting week, I thought. 2 weeks. But clearly some fundamentals are being looked at. It's not surprising. This always happens at Sibos time. People go back to the knitting and saying, what the hell do we do? Why are we doing it? And so on. Sibos gazing is often followed by some interesting developments. We'll see what comes out of Sibos. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Jack.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.